So I have the first agenda item about handoff the MR reviewers and the signee. And as I already shared with you, Kai, yesterday, it was Monday, and with Pedro, we have our continuous meeting today just to discuss this issue. So I made a summary note here. I'm not going to like digging into details. I think that'll take like more than 30 minutes for sure. So the long story short, I think there are two models exist. The one model that was originally proposed was what similar to Garrett does. It's like turn-based and pointing out whose turn is it at the moment. And the new proposal includes what's similar to GitHub does. Like it's more like implicitly show that who and it's just focusing on the reviewers, not just for the signees, so that they will have the review states and they will have more stronger signals, but not for the signee. So you can also check the Figma UI here. And as the next step, as I have chatted with Kai on Monday, I'd like to just run the quick survey, like which channels are they mostly used when they're working on the MR as a signee and also for the reviewers. And the next step would be preparing for the internal interview, validating the assumption, like how important is it for the signee to receiving signal on GitLab here, and how can we solve this problem in a better way? So I like to quickly show the design and explaining this concept and validate which way they prefer to see. So that could be the next step. Any questions?
In the agenda, so B1 and then B2. B1, you explained that it's similar to what Garrett does, and here you called it waiting for, and then for GitHub you call request attention. Would it be the other way around? Because that's what I looking at the designs, that's my impression.
Okay, I'll check the Figma link.
But it's a small thing. It's just one of them saying request attention and the other.
Yeah, I just didn't find the
for.
right naming for the GitHub model, so I just copy and paste from waiting for and request attention from the agenda, the first item.
That's okay.
Yeah. But the more important part is the detail, like the two concepts look similar, but the assumption behind are different. And that's the reason why the design flow and user flow would look different. And my goal is to validate this first and then decide which way to go. Any comment or question?
I mean, we spoke yesterday, and I think I'm fine with validating which of these is sort of the most important and then making a decision on how we go forward. I think that's the right next step to me based on sort of the gaps that I saw in one of the pieces here. And I think we just figure out if it's how much of this we need to cover off and then go from there.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll quickly just explain, because I think what you showed Kai was this concept, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Just to quickly just to exemplify visually what you were explaining about the differences. So in this concept, the signal the action to request someone's attention or say that you're waiting for them. So the handoff process has this button for reviewers. And there's also these icons that not only tell you where this person is in the review process, but at the same time, if if there's an action waiting for them. So it has both concepts of the handoff and the review status in one indicator. And it doesn't provide information or actions for the assignees, only reviewers. And this badge here at the top would be, if I'm not, let me know if I'm saying something incorrectly, Sanjay.
Sure.
This number at the top would be the sum of all merge requests assigned to you and all merge requests assigned to you and review requests waiting for you so that you haven't reviewed yet. So if you already reviewed something, it would go away and it could, for example, become 0, but you can still be assigned as a reviewer. Assignees will always be here with a number. So this is one of the concepts. The other concept is slightly different in that it separates the indicators of who needs to take action from the review status. So if someone has approved, it shows up here, but this person, the indicator, for example, if someone has approved and we're waiting for their action for some reason, is both indicators are visible and those statuses are visible. And the drop down, this number reflects the number of items that need your attention, that have this indicator. And you can have, I don't know, 20 assigned to you and 40 reviews for you, but it will only show the 2 that need your attention because someone has requested your attention in one of the merge requests. And this works for both assignees and reviewers. So those are 2 concepts and both have their pros and cons. And the next steps is what Sanjung was explaining. This was my quick explanation. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add, Sanjung.
No, that was perfect. To me, at least.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. When Sanjay and I talked, my concerns were more about using the merge request dropdown as a to-do list, which the first one that you showed doesn't afford us like the ability to do, because that count will always be reflective of like where you are. It'll always be like things you need to action plus a number that doesn't go up or down unless like you're not assigned to that MR, right? Like it's less
Correct.
actionable in that count. And I think that's where, to me, that's the biggest piece is like, do people work off of that count and need that to be their burn down list, or can that count be sort of reflective of a lot of things? And I think, the initial feedback we got when we dropped, when we added the drop down, and then sort of as we got back and we tried to roll out reviewers internally, even was like, well, if I stay assigned, my count never goes down and I don't know what to do, right? And I think we sort of extrapolate that to both, that like if that count doesn't move in a way that like makes sense, then
right.
then we don't know what you have to do. Like, and I would say my contention is like, and maybe the other piece we need to think about is, do people care if they're an author and have something to do, or if they're a reviewer and have something to do, or do they just need to know they have something to do, right? Like, does it matter? Right. Does that distinction even matter to them is sort of the piece there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, my assumption and this is from my personal experience using GitLab, is that not seeing this number go to 0 means that, like, for example, if I have, okay, let's put, so this one is 0 and this is 1, and this would only go away if I unassign myself or if the MR is merged or closed, right? So this would always stay like this. To me, I become a bit anxious because it means that, well, it's the current flow. So I have to check, I have to open this dropdown and click assign to you and check every MR to know if I need to do something, like have the reviewers already reviewed or not. So this is not as efficient as having this as 0 or not having any number at all, and it would appear only if I need to do something on a merge request. But that's my perspective and my assumption. And I'm glad that Sanjung is talking with engineers to see how that's, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited to see where the feedback comes, but yeah.
So
Cool.
I'll share more if I get more responses from the developers internally first, and if we need to also talk to the external users. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, the second point, I think it's interesting for us to discuss. So Kai brought up this in Slack, that we have a success metric for the code review group. It's in the handbook, in the direction page, and it's the mean time to merge. So it's the duration from the first merge request version to be merged. So from the first push until it's merged. And it's a very broad metric. So as you can see, and maybe if we went further back, it would not change a lot. So this is the number of hours to merge. And interestingly, it has risen a little bit from June 2019 until today. The number of hours has increased. But even so, I don't know if this is due to something in specific that we shipped or not in the code review group, or maybe it's another group that did something that increased these, or maybe not. It's not something that we should worry too much about, but it's a very broad metric and it's not actionable. And so, yeah, I was thinking that, I don't know how other groups do it, but would it be possible to have sub-metrics or other smaller metrics that are more actionable? For example, the time from when I assign a reviewer to that reviewer approving, or the cycle between, or in addition, or the cycle between the ping pong. So author requesting a reviewer, and then the reviewer going back to the author. Yeah, I don't know. Thoughts?
I think those are all pieces of it. And I'd say those are things we probably need to figure out how to measure. I need to look at the mean time to merge. The mean time to merge one is sort of easy to do in the database because we have timestamps. And so it makes it easy to you just need 2 timestamps. I don't know how we calculate these other things easily. But they are probably things we could do and should do. We just have to think about how to do it, I guess. I had sort of, and I'll just go to my next comment. I think when Sarah had mentioned this to me, I had sort of thought maybe we should think about slicing that data differently. Because that's all of GitLab.com, which doesn't account for 100% real usage in all cases. There are times where people have sample and demo projects, or people intentionally have long running MRs, or sort of other things that are factors there. And that's every single merge request on GitLab.com. And someone may abandon an instance and then come back, 3 months later and pick something up and merge it. And it's not really reflective of an actual dev team and sort of what their mean time to merge is. On the flip side, I don't think we want to do and change the metric to be the mean time to merge of MRs in GitLab. I don't think that's in the GitLab project. I don't think that's helpful to know that our own org is very efficient. But I wonder if we could do something based on the top number of customers, the largest number of SaaS customers. And maybe use a similar metric like we did when we were trying to figure out how we would decide a large MRs. We pulled the top X number of customers based on how many MRs they had merged in the last 90 days. And we use that customer list and only query their mean time to merge, because it's a small enough sample of what we would assume would be active customers. And we would potentially like detect that anomaly faster without like sort of the noise. Like it'd be the same as if you like in data sets, you like eliminate, you know, the X number of lowest and then the X number of highest like things to like make that average look more normalized. I'm wondering if that would help make that metric like more reliable. But I don't know. It was just a thought. I was thinking maybe we just change the slicing pattern there. You're on mute.
Thanks. I think the slicing is interesting. If anything, it would probably allow us to break down this large monster of the mean time to merge and just look at smaller bits to then decide what we want to do. Because maybe we can realize if we look at just, I don't know, large projects or very old projects that we have positively or negatively affected, and there's a trend there. So I think slicing is probably the first thing to do to understand if the mean time to merge can be more interesting to track. So yeah, I think it's a good first step to iterate. Yeah, you have an answer to my first point, or I think you already said something like that.
Yeah, I was just typing in my answer from when I responded to that.
Okay. Yeah, below that chart, interestingly, we say that we would create quarterly baselines for, I think, UX. Yeah, to provide qualitative feedback. So yeah, we haven't done that. But nonetheless, this is something that we should do nonetheless. And we already have some, so we did the category maturity scorecard that included some part of code review. So that is the category maturity, and we can look into that as well. But this is something that I'm hoping we can do a bit more often, is these quarterly baselines. And that's actually something that I'm planning to do. This milestone, let me see if I can link to that, is so to understand the performance, the opportunities to improve the perceived performance, I'm going to do a UX scorecard for the review changes job to be done. And that will give us a final score. And it will, I think it's probably just a heuristic evaluation, which means that it will be just me going through the flow and evaluating based on my perception and what could be specific problems and identifying those. And in the end, it will have a score. We have a grading rubric that basically says exceeds expectation, meets expectation, it's average, poor, terrible, and that grades the experience. And it's an heuristic and something that we could do. At the same time, I'm looking at how we can measure the perceived performance of merge requests, and that could be another thing. But I don't know. We already have a lot of things in Periscope, a lot of dashboards with different metrics. I don't know. I think we should align on which ones we want to track more closely and see those improvements. Catherine, do you have any thoughts from UX research perspective on, like we're only thinking a lot quantitatively, but for qualitative data, would there be any other significant metrics that we could track to help understand if we're succeeding, basically?
I'm not immediately sure, but I do think just gathering qualitative data along with it to understand why certain things are either not improving or maybe are improving would be good. But I don't have a specific recommendation at the moment.
That's okay. Yeah, I only have one quick question about this. So in the direction page, we say that this is the success metric, but then we also have the GMAO, which is which?
MAU is the metric that the business is run on. I think the group is not run on MAU exclusively. The group is run on the merge request experience. And so I would say as a group, and it's probably reflected in the current quarter's work where we're thinking about performance, right? We care about the merge request experience and making sure that code that's submitted via merge request is taken care of and merged as quickly as possible, right? That is ultimately what the code review group facilitates. Users are a part of that, and it is the metric that is standard for the business to measure. And so I think it's both, and they're correlated in the sense that if the merge request experience is poor or merge requests take a long time to merge, more users might like tail off, or we might see adoption of fewer features, or we might not see, like we rolled out multi-line comments, right? Like that's a good example of like, we made like a change to multi-line comments thinking that would improve, the code review experience and make it faster to leave better feedback about more lines of code. And what we saw was like an initial pop in multi-line comments based on like that hitting a release and being in a release post. So we saw a lot of usage, and we've now seen that tail back off. And so what that tells us is like, you could look at that and go, okay, there's probably two things. One, either the feature still doesn't quite meet some level of usability that people are looking for, or multi-line comments aren't actually that valuable in terms of the code review process and speeding up like the time to merge. And so it's easier and faster if people just leave a single line comment and they're not willing to like take that extra effort, right? Like you could, and we don't know, like I'm just off the cuff, like hypothesizing. We don't know one way or the other, but I think it's both. And so we have to be mindful of both. And I don't think we as a group have done a good job at looking at like mean time to merge or accounting for that. Like we tend to focus on the MAU numbers because that is what I have to report on a regular basis. So that's the charts that we did. And we've sort of recently instrumented against MAU numbers for a variety of things. I think now we're getting to like a data maturity point where we're starting to go, okay, this is interesting. What else do we need to know here, right? This is the same thing that I opened an issue. You asked for an issue on suggestions, applied suggestions, and total number of suggestions, right? Like there's a huge discrepancy in that MAU number, like a massive difference in the number of people who make a suggestion and the number of people who apply suggestions. And so now we're at a point where we are able to go, okay, the MAU numbers don't seem right. What other things do we need to keep asking ourselves to figure that out? And then understand if it's like something that's impacting, the speed at which the merge request is done, or if this is expected, or is like, those other things. And I think that's where we're at in sort of like our data maturity journey. So they're both important. I think as a group, we need to start figuring out how we talk about mean time to merge more, but largely every time I've looked at that chart, it's not been, I think to Sarah's point and why we're having this conversation is like, you look at it and you go, neat, that number's been the same for 2.5 years. So like, could we have done nothing for the last 2.5 years and like our MAU would have grown as much as it grown? Or like, did we add a bunch of stuff that made it better? You know, did we do anything or nothing or whatever? And we don't have a good answer for that piece, if that is really what we care about. We just know nothing's really changed over 2 years. Other than that one spike where it goes up to like 90 hours for reasons that no one knows.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that makes sense. From what you were explaining and talking about the MR experience, it sounds like we should be tracking the usability and the three agreed upon facets of usability. So efficacy, efficiency, and satisfaction, because they basically cover everything that you just mentioned, right? So satisfaction, if people are happy about the experience, and maybe it's not a fast experience, but they're happy, right? Their perceived performance leads to satisfaction, for example. But then you have just pure performance, so efficiency, how long does someone take to comment, for example, or approve? And also efficacy, how many attempts do users take to do something, right? How many errors can they make? So it sounds like we should be tracking more usability than anything else. So yeah, I think it's good food for thought. Yeah, and the multi-line comments, I think it's due to the very structure of code files, and I don't think it would change. But yeah, we don't have a lot of time left, so we can jump to your next point, Kai, if you want.
Yeah, we're up at time, and everyone can go back and read it. This is every time I jump back into this issue, my head hurts more. And there's two pieces here, and I know, Pedro, you responded to some of it. Some of this is the default when a project is created, the value for these two settings is nil. And Ruby treats nil as false. But these should actually be true, even though they're unchecked. And this is where it gets complicated, because we have like a double or triple, depending on how you want to count negatives here, and that the language we used is prevent, which is negative. But the value that we expect in the API is true when you say prevent, I think. But then that creates like something not happening, which would be like the false side of that. And so there's this sort of like third negative. And so we could fix this, like Carrie could fix it and say like nil is true, and that would sort of make the default new project behavior work like we expect. But then like the API continues to be confusing, and the language continues to be confusing. Mike suggested we like change the language on those to not be negative, and then the checkboxes would be affirmative of things happening or not happening. But that's also like a big change. And then there's like this whole other piece to consider where people are probably operating under the broken default system that we have today. And like, if we fix this, like we might create an unknown situation for lots of people where suddenly like the settings do what they were intended to do, but they never did that to begin with. So people like now have unexpected behavior. So I'd just say, take a look and like read through this. We're up at time, so I don't want to discuss it now, but it is, it's confusing and complicated, and I could use some help trying to figure out like, what do we think the best thing to do is, and how do we do that? And if that means like 2 or 3 steps that we need to take, then like, let's just say it's 2 or 3 steps versus maybe stop gapping it with something and then adjusting it later. So feel free to take a look and try your best to understand all the language and consequences there.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I'll take a look.
Yeah, and thanks for finding that in the docs, because that helped, and also threw a giant wrench in everything. So it's appreciated that you found that there was supposed to be a default. But thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
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 everyone.